From Evil Seeds, a Turok novella by Fabian Nicieza. This story takes place after the death of Primar Gen and was released on the official Turok website from December 16, 1998 to April 1, 1999. Final chapter. Everything sucks. Usually, being a Turok, the Sequin Native American protector of the universe, required performing impossible feats as casually as anyone else would tie their shoelaces. Joshua Fireseed, campus stud and baseball star at Oklahoma College at Oklahoma City, had comfortably slipped into the overall requirements of the job. Indeed, having saved the universe several times since he first assumed the mantle of Turok, Josh had possibly begun to get a little cocky about the enormous scope of his responsibilities. The current situation was such a time. Josh hadn't given the ridiculous nature of his plan to save the lost land a second thought. He merely assumed that the inherent stupidity of his reasoning would be acceptable. Lucky for him, his best friend Barry Hackowitz was always around to play his usual game of nasal devil's advocate. "You're an idiot!" he shouted. "Yeah, but I got abs of steel, don't I?" smiled Joshua as he continued to don various garments and weapons, which he removed from the seemingly empty satchel at his side. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Nothing, but it always throws you off, doesn't it?" Barry sputtered. He was a 20-year-old strung tighter than a bundle of piano wires, and he sputtered like a seasoned vaudevillian. Such apoplexy was made easier for him, since Barry hated Josh's arrogant non-sequiturs almost as much as he hated not knowing an answer to Final Jeopardy. "Your plan, correct me if I'm wrong, is to allow these alien hijacks, who are looking to use a Barakian collective landmass to open up a wormhole to their home planet, the opportunity to follow through with their plan. Right. Just so you can catch their continent-sized territory as it enters the wormhole and send it somewhere else." "You're so cute when you're expository," said Josh. "I mean, even assuming you could do such a thing, how does that solve the problem in any way, shape, or form? The Barakians will be effectively lobotomized if they are forced to align their geoelectric cybernetic brainwave patterns to the signature necessary to create a gravity wedge large enough to open a wormhole. And we need the Barakians alive if we're to use them to attune their cybernetic signature to ease the pressure running along the Lost Land's tectonic fault lines." "Do you ever listen to yourself when you talk?" asked Josh. "You really need to address that sci-fi techno-geek thing you have going there." "I am sizzling mad," replied Barry. "This is me getting very, very angry. I am in fear for my life. I think I have things under control. Do you? Quiz me." "Why do you think letting the hijacks accomplish their plan is the best way to solve our problem?" "I'm going to let the hijacks think they're about to get away scot-free. Aiden and you both said that the Barakians aren't threatened by the wormhole opening up, but by when it closes, right?" Yeah, I mean, at least that was what we could figure out based on the information available. Realigning their geoelectric encephalographic patterns to create the gravimetric wedge, or the wormhole, isn't the problem. Shutting down the hole and forcing them to occupy a region of territory that they're not sympathetically aligned with is. Yeah, whatever. In English, opening the door is cool. Closing it leaves the Barakian collective out in the cold. Well, that was English, but I hardly think that was an explanatory analogy. "For the geek impaired it was," said Josh. "So I sent Aiden into the Barakian mass to sync up her bioelectric wavelengths with the signals being pumped out by the hijack's control center. When the time comes, we take over control of the Barakian and stop the hijacks from letting them, whatever, squat on the area they'll have evacuated when their landmass is lifted up into the wormhole." "Okay, I'm following you so far," said Barry. "The hijack's gravimetric force field I'm scanning around their entire region is actually like putting their territory into a soap bubble before it gets blown up into the air." "Exactly. And you're going to blow that bubble in another direction, while Aiden stops the Barakians from sitting their collective behinds down where the soap bubble used to be." Okay, scattershot Barry. "I'm seeing the possibilities now. But exactly how and where are you going to send the hijacks?" Josh patted the light burden satchel slung at his side. "The how is right here. I just have to find the cojones to open up a big enough fold gate to let the hijacks' lands pass through. As for the where, well, to tell you the truth, I was kind of figuring anywhere but here would be fine with me. Then why not just let them go through the wormhole and concentrate just on keeping the Barakians alive? You're the one who told me that for every action there's an equal reaction. If the hijacks go through the wormhole, something has to fill the spatial vacuum they left behind. I don't have Delaware in my back pocket, do you? So by routing them through a fold gate into the nether space, said Barry, you'll actually be closing the wormhole down before it gets fed or needs to be fed. That would be the plan. Barry looked over the scanning systems for a silent minute. You are nuts. But, he smiled, but it's probably the best chance we have of killing two birds with one stone. Now who's not using enough of an expository analogy? Outside, the air above the hijacks' lands swirled in clockwise and counterclockwise funnels. It looked to Joshua and Barry as if two toilet bowls were flushing in opposite directions, directly on top of each other at the same time. The skies were thick with pain from the spatial crowbar the hijackses had used to manipulate the surrounding gravity. Inside the only city on the hijacks' territories, a blackout had been imposed. The towering spires of their main technological buildings were dark. No traffic or activity was visible on the causeways. The housing areas half a mile to the east of the spires were quiet. It was eerily silent and dark. The hijacks' territories are about a 15 square mile diameter, including their agricultural fields to the south, said Barry, his face lit by the glow of the scanning equipment. To Josh, he looked like Mr. Spock on the original Star Trek show, hunched over his blue light science scanner. If Leonard Nimoy were half a foot shorter, had scraggly blonde hair, a chalkboard scratch of a voice, and a pointy head instead of pointy ears. That going to be doable for you? Josh opened up the satchel mouth at his side, which measured about 18 inches at its most stretched out state. Should fit just about right? How are you going to get enough height to pull this off? Barry asked. The skimmercraft's propulsion systems might not be able to cope with the gravity pressure. Josh reached his fingertips into the bag and flicked his hand as if he was spraying water. A sprinkle of soft, shimmering dust lifted into the air and just as quickly disappeared. I'm calling a taxi. Barry merely shook his head in absent frustration and continued to monitor the scanning systems. The pressures outside were becoming enormous. Lightning began to arc from the ground up, cascading from the gravity field surrounding the hijacks' lands into the charged atmosphere above the ground. Should be soon now, he said. Open up a comm link with Aiden, Josh instructed as he put a communications headband on. He fiddled with the keypad on the earpiece to make sure that the frequencies between the ship and Aiden matched. Keep a three-way line open so we all work together. The timing on this is going to be tight. Josh opened the bay hatch door to the skimmer craft. A tremendous gust of wind ripped through the skimmer cabin, nearly knocking Barry over and sending his glasses somewhere in the vicinity of his Adam's apple. Where the heck are you going? Josh winked and dove out of the skimmer craft. We're a half a mile in the air, Barry shouted as he struggled to shut the open bay door. As the door closed, he looked out the cabin's front view screens and saw Josh riding a pterodactyl bionosaur away from the craft. That's the definition of a taxi to a Turok, Barry thought. Josh was protected from the gravimetric pressures by a small bubble dome cockpit atop the pterodactyl's riding harness. The creature flew through the raging storm, its metallic wings unfettered by the stew of activity around it. You read me? Asked Barry as he flicked a console button to open a line to Josh. Yup, a slightly staticky response came back. Sending out a signal to Aiden now, said Barry. A silent static hum filled the air while they both awaited a response. I am linked to your frequency signal now, Aiden's hollow voice replied, sounding slightly more tinny than normal. What's your status? Asked Barry. I am still attempting to attenuate my wavelength spectrum to those employed by the hijacks, she said. It is a very complicated multi-band wavelength signal they are using, not so much to override the Barakian encephalographic neural impulses, so much as to bypass and reroute them. So the collective thinks it's still in control of its own body. asked Barry. Accurate, came back her response. To provide Joshua an analogy he would understand, the Barakians are saying, right arm move, but the signal is translated and received as left leg step. I think I got it the first time, thank you very much, interrupted Josh's voice, the sarcasm slicing through the static. Will you be able to lock onto the signals in time to pull off Josh's plan? Asked Barry. Aiden's response was not very comforting. We shall all find out soon enough. The open line remained silent for an excruciating 10 seconds, until Joshua said, I think I'm in as good a position now as I need to be. I can't even read you on the scanning systems, Josh, said Barry, double-checking 2 monitors. It's like trying to look through pea soup. Tell that to Terry, said Josh. He had to fly through the stuff. Definitely some dino biscuits for this guy when we're done. If this doesn't work, he'll be Kentucky Fried Terry, muttered Barry. Could you repeat that? Piped in Aiden. Never mind, said both Barry and Josh simultaneously. Outside, high above the hijack's territory and the pinprick of a skimmer craft, the atmosphere was doing the lambada. Josh had never seen air twist around quite like that. It was as if reality were being folded like a bedsheet and then carelessly opened up again in a wrinkled flutter. For the first time, he questioned whether he would be capable of creating a fold gate large enough to accomplish the task. Before he had an opportunity to doubt himself any further, a tremendous thunderclap reverberated across the sky. The vibrations shook him to the bone and caused Terry to buck in protest. A flash of lightning ripped across the sky to his left, charging the air with ozone static that caused the hairs on Josh's arms to tingle. The ensuing thunderclap was a sonic boom, strong enough to throw Terry into a tailspin. It's hitting the fan up here, said Josh. Behind and above him, the funnels made by the swirling skies were beginning to take on a single, uniform, cohesive, clockwise motion. Reality was converging on the point of space where the wormhole would appear. Barry's voice. We're about 15 seconds from a signal band match between the vomit in the atmosphere and the hijack's shield frequency harmonics. Aiden's voice. I have captured 3 of the overlapping frequencies. Barry's voice. How many total bandwidths are there? Aiden's voice. 27. Barry's voice. Josh? Josh grunted. She's got more time on her end than we do on ours, Bar. We don't know how long it'll take the soap bubble to actually rise out of the ground and into the wormhole. The Barakians won't squat to fill the space left by the land shift until the hijacks have gone through the hole, right? Theoretically, yes, replied Barry, but don't hold me to it. This isn't exactly simple trigonometry here. Had he the opportunity, Josh would have had a witty comeback for any sentence which used the words simple and trigonometry in the same breath. Unfortunately for the Turok, he unexpectedly became occupied by the complete rending of time and space above his head. The wormhole had opened up. It made one of the fold gates Joshua usually opened to travel to and from the Lost Land look like, well, an open door compared to the top of a tornado. One other thing that Josh hadn't counted on, if the wormhole could create a vacuum strong enough to suck up an area roughly the size of Manhattan, why wouldn't it be strong enough to suck little old him and a poor pterodactyl as well? The answer was obvious, and came to Josh the moment he was yanked higher into the atmosphere like a fleck of dust through a straw. Over Barry's open communications line, Josh's voice came through, "Ah!" Barry's response, "Oh crap!" Aiden's voice, "What?" "I think Josh is in trouble," he said. "How are we doing?" "You seem to be doing fine," came Aiden's voice, the hint of her attempted humor even coming through the hollow echo of her voice. "I, on the other hand, have only acquired 13 of the necessary bandwidth wavelengths so far." Outside, the pterodactyl was in an upwards tailspin, and it was all Josh could do to prevent from up-chucking in the small domed cockpit, much less find a way to regain control of his mount. If he got sucked into the wormhole before he could open up a fold gate, they'd have no chance whatsoever of stopping the hijacks. And then it hit him. The solution. The wormhole was a direct conduit through the netherscape straight on through to a point in the real universe, wherever the hijack's homeworld was. He didn't have to open up a fold gate before the hijacks entered the wormhole. He could simply use the fissure already in motion as his fold gate. If he closed the back door which opened onto the hijack's homeworld, then the shifted mass would simply be trapped between here and there, more specifically, nether space itself. And by preventing both sides of the vacuum from being accessed, the operating rule of a physics vacuum would not be enforceable. Josh fiercely pulled on the reins of the pterodactyl's harness and tried to point the Bionosaur's head towards the wormhole. It tried to defy him until Josh shut down the bionic optical implants which served as the creature's eyes. Unable to see what a mess it was flying through placated the animal. Josh kicked at its side, and the metallic wings picked up even more speed, hurtling towards the wormhole like a bullet. A deft slip of his fingers, and the light burden's flap flipped open. The magical energies contained in the limitless bag of tricks immediately reacted to the churning maelstrom around it. In layman's terms, the satchel started to dry heave. Spatial energies hiccuped from the opening of the light burden as Josh tried to find the right feel for a fold gate which could match the wormhole's spatial characteristics. In essence, Josh had put his satchel on a scanning mode, like a car radio looking for a station which wasn't playing Britney Spears. It was bumpy going for the light burden, halting several times as it came close. Josh knew he'd hit the all-cool station as soon as the light burden's open maw erupted with a funnel of energy all its own. The small whirlpool spun outward, matching the clockwise direction of the enormous wormhole around him. Josh felt the strain, as if he were being asked to keep the barn door to the entire universe open during the worst hurricane in history. "Barry," he hissed, "I'm in place. I have it open." He could only make out every other word of Barry's response on his comlink. His friend had either said, "The hijacks are starting to lift their territorial mass out of the ground right now," or, "A fax is farting bare ass sounds how." Josh figured it was the former. Inside the skimmer craft, Barry watched with a mix of dread and awe as an entire region of land below him slowly ripped itself out of the topsoil, the gravimetric bubble protecting the territories cast deep into the bedrock below the hijack's lands. Like a piece of the nastiest Velcro coming undone, the landmass cleared the ground and slowly rose into the air in a measured counterclockwise spin. "It's up and coming your way," shouted Barry. "It's incredible!" Josh's voice. "Did you say it looked edible?" "Never mind," said Barry, knowing the communications line was getting garbled. "Aiden, how are you doing?" "Up to 20, came her strained voice. Barry knew how taxing this had to be on her energy form. She was basically stretching her control over the sentient mass of energy that comprised her body across a very vast metaphysical plane. "How fast are the hijacks going?" "I figure you have about 1 minute tops," Barry responded. He wished he could have given her a more favorable answer. "A shame, really," said Aiden's eerily calm voice. "I think I will need 1.5 minutes. "Well, I can't do much to buy you time on your end," said Barry, suddenly coming up with an idea. "But I think I can do something on this side of things." Barry ran his thin fingers over the navigation systems and steered the skimmer craft for a beeline course aimed directly at the Hijaxian control center mounted on the Barakian collective. He had realized earlier on that these aliens had willingly, or unwillingly, who knew, sacrificed themselves for the sake of their people. They had taken control of the collective, knowing full well that their job would not be completed until well after their people had made it through the wormhole. Since Josh's plan was twofold: redirect the hijack's territory and stop the hijacks left behind from plopping the Barakian butts down on the vacated landmass, he knew that each was a distinct and dissimilar course of action. Aiden needed more time to gain control over the wavelength spectrum they were using to herd the collective. He would find a way to give her that time by attacking the hijack's control center. Josh would or wouldn't do what he had to up there, but both parts of the plan needed to be fulfilled in order to give them any hope of safeguarding Galliana. In the air, Josh saw the growing mass of land through the shifting energy spectrum. What had begun as a small, ill-defined black smudge below him had begun to take greater form and acuity. An entire patch of land the size of an island was rising towards him. He could begin to make out the agricultural fields, the city's building shapes, and the cramped suburban living areas. The moral ambiguity of his actions slid across his conscience. He was consigning an entire population to an eternal purgatory. Yes, they could survive in the Netherscape, even thrive, if they maintained their food supplies and life support systems within the gravimetric bubble, but they would be forever adrift. All they wanted to do was go home. He couldn't blame them for that, or judge them too harshly. It was, as Barry would say, a matter of simple mathematics, the needs of the many versus the needs of the many more. The hijacks themselves, as a people, if not as individuals, had determined this course of action. They could have tried working with the unified lands of Galliana, like Forever Light, to find a more workable solution. They had chosen not to. If the consequence of their actions were banishment at sea, never to find a port to call home, well, the consequences of Josh's inaction would be far worse. An inevitable death to all the living creatures in the Lost Land, and possibly death to the entire universe awaited them if they did not act to stop the hijacks. Josh looked around him, rearing Terry in a semicircle. The gaping maw encircling him was staggering in its proportions. The immensity of his actions was nearly beyond his ability to comprehend, so Joshua did the next best thing. He belittled the whole Magilla and treated it in as mundane and commonplace a fashion as he could. "Okay, relay throw is coming in. Get your feet set for the pivot. Don't throw it before you've caught it." He muttered the same litany of instructions all athletes ran through during the white-hot moments when their minds and bodies were a part of the direct play. The Hyjaxian territories loomed below him, slowly spinning for an eventual collision with his holding place in the spatial storm. Josh knew that he had to wait until the last possible moment, and then not get out of the way, but actually ride the wave into the wormhole ahead of the landmass in order to seal the far door. Navigating his way through and out of the Netherscape was a routine matter for him, as easily as gliding in and out of the doors to his sister's upstairs hallway. He just couldn't ride into the wormhole too far ahead of the hijacks, or he'd risk losing control of the fold gate opening, which had superimposed itself over the diameter of the wormhole itself. Josh waited. The glowing energies of the gravimetric force field inched closer. He could see spatial energies bouncing off the shield like bugs on a windshield. Closer. The pterodactyl sensed the incredible pressures surrounding it, even if he couldn't see it. He started bucking wildly, nervous over his impending fate. Josh dug his heels into the ribs of the animal, hoping to remind the creature of its domesticated training. The slap didn't work, so he tried a stroke, scratching the small patch of leather hide on his back that was available to him under the harness saddle he straddled. The human touch had a more desirable effect. The pterodactyl calmed down enough for Josh to regain control of the mount. The city came towards him, looking like Atlantis rising from the ocean depths, with Josh as a piece of flotsam floating in its direct path. When he felt the energies of the gravimetric forces tickling the soles of his feet, and he could actually make out individual windows on the building towers beneath him, Josh decided he had waited long enough. He kicked at Terry's side, turning him up, and jetted into the gaping maw of infinity. Far below, the skimmer craft sidled up to the lurching Barakian collective as it shuffled towards the patch of rent earth where the hijack's territory has lain. Barry called up an automatic weapons flurry and targeted the control center affixed to the Barakian's terrestrial form. He kept the weapons systems on a low setting so as to distract, not destroy the aliens. Barry preferred to think of himself as a lady killer, not a real killer. The weapons array let loose with a volley of rotating energy pulses, which hit the control center square on. Inside, the hijacked scientists scrambled to keep the biodome intact. Several consoles and panels began belching sparks as a fissure in the plexiglass shielding of the construct let the colder air of their current altitude into the already frantic environment. Barry said aloud, "That should buy you some more time." "I think it did," Adon's voice came in reply. "Their control of 5 previously catalogued wavelengths was severed by your attack. I only have 2 more bandwidths to attenuate. Even if they were to try and position the collective now, I suspect that they'd get no more than one of the Barakians' feet in place. Barry looked up at the sky, his scanners useless in the barrage of interspatial activity. The air was thick with enough atmospheric juice to fill an ocean. His eyes could barely make out the dot that was the hijack's territory as it entered the swirling maelstrom of the wormhole. The pinprick disappeared in a haze of roiling energy, and just as suddenly, the wormhole disappeared. The hijacks in the control center, malfunctions be damned, hit the switch to activate the Barakians. Aiden was right in her assumption, but wrong in her anatomy. The hijacks did have enough control left to move one part of the Barakian collective, but it wasn't the leg, it was an arm, the left arm, which was coming down directly towards the skimmer craft. Inside the wormhole, Joshua rode like the fires of hell were at his heels. He flipped open his tech bow and let loose with an arrow made up of pure foldgate energy. It reached the small tail funnel of the wormhole and exploded with interspatial force, sealing the conduit and creating a backlash towards him. He rapidly opened up a small foldgate, steering the pterodactyl through it, just as the backwash formed the collapse engulfed the point where he had been. Joshua never even got to see the hijack's inside funnel as it collapsed into the netherscape before his smaller foldgate closed behind him. And he barely had enough time to look up to avoid a group of people looking up in astonishment at him atop the observation deck of the Empire State Building in Midtown Manhattan in broad daylight, before quickly opening another foldgate back to Galliana. In the Lost Land, Barry cringed in abject terror as the massive encrusted hide of the swatting arm engulfed his small ship in shadows. And a funny thing happened on the way to heaven. He got a reprieve. The arm stopped, about 10 yards from the hovering craft. Aiden's voice came through the comlink. "That would make for 27 bandwidths, I believe." Barry looked up to see the hijacks in the control center with their arms raised in surrender as Joshua, astride the pterodactyl, a cannon fusion launcher in both arms, gave them little choice. Days later, with the hijacks under arrest and the Barakians safely nestled in the land vacated by the hijacks, while still in complete control of their collective hive mind, Aiden flipped a switch to activate the cybernetic implants they had placed in the collective. Everyone there, no matter what species they were originally from, took part in a very silly human ritual and crossed their fingers. The scientists from Forever Light followed the cascade as the broadband wavelength spectrum flooded over the Barakians' collective encephalographic wavelengths, washing them in a warm rinse. The realignment of the geoelectric bandwidths wouldn't hurt the collective in the least, and it could save them all. Slowly, the signature lines aligned themselves between the Barakians' geoelectric output and the needs of the Lost Land's tectonic ley lines. The graph lines overlapped, fluttered back and forth within millimeters of each other, and then settled into one continuous flat line. Two different wavelength grids matched perfectly. Within minutes, the perpetual grumbling tremors which had vibrated across Galliana for months since Primogen was killed simply stopped. Time would tell if it would be the long-term salvation of the Lost Land, or just a short-term finger in the dike until a more permanent answer could be found. For now, they could all breathe a little easier, since in geological terms, the solution, even if short-lived, would serve for a good 1,000 years or so. Barry high-fived an alien scientist who happened to have 8 fingers on one hand, then turned to do the same to Aiden. His thrust hand passed right through the upraised holographic image of her arm, and he spastically fell to the soft grassy knoll atop the Barakian. Everyone had a good laugh, as usual, at Barry's expense. He was glad to comply, and in too good a mood to be embarrassed about it. Josh, never one for overt emotional displays, was reticent even by his standard. Aiden approached him and said, "Thinking about the hijacks?" Josh smiled. She knew him too well. They were two of a kind. The responsibility never left their shoulders anymore. "Yeah, I was, wondering if it was fair, what I did to them. If maybe I should go into the netherscape and figure out a safe way to get them through. or even bring them back here. Returning them to Galiana would only create a situation where they would try all over again, Aiden stated. As for sending them somewhere else, that might be good for the hijacks, but what about the people of whichever planet in your reality that were forced to accept them? Hardly fair to them, I imagine. Yeah, you'd be right. So all that's left for them is perpetual purgatory, floating around in their city forever? They live, she said coldly. Some might consider that more than they deserve. If you wish to be positive about it, at the very least you have given them time to atone for their sins of aggression. Or you could be negative and say it just gives them eternity to plan their revenge, huh? He laughed. Either way, a Turok will be prepared to stop them. She smiled, her bioelectric aura creating a tingle across his back as she brushed her hand across his cheek. Josh breathed a weary sigh, his eyes looking at her, but seeing something far, far away. Yeah, there'll be a Turok to stop them, always. There was a silent pause, which was broken when she asked, "Did I say thank you for once again saving Galiana and the known universe?" Her thin smile created a wider grin on his face. Nah, I think you forgot to. How is it again on Earth that someone expresses deep sentiments of thanks? She said coyly. A kiss, is it not? He leaned towards her, his lips brushing a form of cohesive light and sustained gravity wells. His body felt a rush of fire along every synaptic gap. They broke off, both feeling the deeper longing within them. He smiled again. What? Josh dipped his chin into his shoulder and arched a seductive eyebrow as he said, "I was just thinking, if that's the payment I can expect, maybe the hijacks can come back and try again tomorrow." "No need for them to do that," she said. "In order for me to do this." They kissed again. In some cases, the Turok's rewards were more than worth the risks. End of story. From Evil Seeds, a Turok novella by Fabian Nicieza.